Hello, and welcome to Michell Consulting's webinar series for our Michell University. Today we're going to be working with SAP Business One, and we're going to be talking about the additional expenses. For the purpose of the demo, we're using SAP Business One version 8.82. So let's talk about the additional expenses in SAP Business One. When we enter a document, for example, we're going to start off with a sales order. You see we have our freight. And here we can set up additional freight charges or additional expenses for the order. Today's purpose, we're just going to stay with the sales order, but this feature will work in any of the marketing documents. So for example, you can use them in the sales documents as well as the purchasing documents. Let's start off with the setup. We're going to go into Administration, Setup, General, and Freight. Here we can determine our freight types. Again, for today's demonstration, we're going to be dealing with two of them. We have a freight and an insurance, but we can create as many as we want here. We have the revenue account. This is the default revenue account for general ledger postings. This is the expense account. So the revenue account will be used in the sales documents, such as invoices. The expense will be used on the purchasing documents, such as AP invoices. You can set a fixed amount. So you can, for example, if I put an amount here, it will always show up on the marketing document with that amount. You can have fixed amounts for revenues, fixed amounts for expenses, and your distribution method. Here you have some options. So we can go in, and if we select none, the freight amount is not distributed among the document rows. And you cannot select the option none if you've selected the stock and purchase, which we'll talk about in a few moments here. Quantity distributes a freight amount among the document rows in proportion to the quantity of each row. So for example, if there are 3 rows with a quantity of 5, 3, and 2 respectively, and the freight amount is $100, the freight amount will be distributed as follows: $50 for the first row, $30 for the second row, and $20 for the third row. Volume distributes the freight amount among the document rows in proportion to the volume of the items in each row. Weight distributes the freight amount among the document rows in proportion to the weight of each item in the row. Equally will distribute the freight amount equally among the document rows. So for example, if the freight amount is divided by the number of rows and distributed according, regardless of the quantity of each row. And you can do a row total. The row total distributes the freight amount among the document rows in proportion to the total amount for each row. So for example, if there are 3 rows with the amounts of $500, $300, and $200 respectively, the freight amount is entered as $100. The freight amount is distributed as follows: $50 to the first row, $30 to the second row, and $20 for the third row. The include in 1099, this is localization. We're using the U.S. localization, so we have the option of including this in our 1099s. We generate 1099s for our vendors. We have our drawing method, and in the drawing method, we can select none. No freight will be copied to the target document. So when we're going from a sales order to a delivery, the freight entered on the sales order will not go over to the target document, the delivery document. We can use quantity. The amount is divided into the item quantity for each unit carrying the same amount of freight. Total. SAP Business One calculates which part of the document total or row total is copied to the target document. And then it adds the relative amount of the document or row freight to that target document. And all will copy all the freight to the target documents. Stock. We have the option here. This adds the freight amount entered either at the row level or the total level to the item's cost calculated when working with a perpetual inventory. Last purchase price updates the last purchase price list after adding an AP invoice, which includes the freight per row. And then we have our distribution rules and projects, which are standard in SAP Business One. So we can use distribution rules, specify a distribution rule to be linked to the freight charge. When the freight charge is used in accounting documents, the freight amount is allocated by default to the distribution rule specified. And projects, you can specify a project and relate it to the freight. So this is the setup. So now let's go in and let's take a look and let's see how this works. We're going to go to Sales and AR, and we're going to go into a sales order. We're going to create a sales order. I'm going to add some line items. And for purposes, let's go ahead and change the unit price to our example. So we'll put 500, take out the discount. We'll put 300, remove the discount, and 200. So we see here we have a total of $1,000 to be distributed. Let's take out our discount. So let's go here into freight. So we can open up our freight. And again, the default here, the distribution method is row total. So we're going to start with a row total. So in this example, we're going to distribute by the amounts of the rows, but we can change this default. See? By the way, if you want to work with the volume and weight, you must specify that in the item. So if we go here to our item, we have our volume and weight calculations for sales and our volume and weight calculations for purchasing. So let's go and let's put $100 of freight. Again, we can specify distribution rules and projects, and we can see the status of the freight line. We can also add a remark if we wish. Let's update. So now we look, and we can see that we have the freight set up to distribute by row total. So again, as per our example, we're taking the row total. So we're taking our rows are $1,000. This is 50%. So we're going to put 50% of the $100, and so on. If we were to add here, say another $50, you can see that again we update. So we distribute our amount out. We call the order back up. Again, we can see the effect. If we click on here, we have the option of displaying, do not display freights with zero amounts. In this case, we won't show anything because we have no zero amounts. But if we had several freights, you can set this up so we only see the ones that we've entered. So let's see some other options here. So let's go back into administration, setup, general, freight. Let's put a fixed amount. Back into our sales order. And we can immediately see that we're picking up the fixed amount. We haven't even started to begin. So again, if we want to do this, we can set it up. We can enter a document. And we'll leave these totals the way they are, and you can see our distribution method here of freight. We can always override this and make our changes. Go back in. Let's remove that. So again, we have our drawing method here. We have everything going across. Let's see how that works when we actually copy documents and how we're doing our updating of our stock totals and our stock costs. Let's go back into sales orders, create another sales order. here, we see we have our amounts, freight. We can see that in the item. We have our item cost. Let's do a copy too. So let's take this and move it. So we're going to copy this sales order to a delivery. And again, we can see the delivery ticket coming over with the amount. We go to our form settings. And let's open up the field so we can see it. And we can see our amounts coming over. If we look at the two documents, our base document being the sales order, what we've done is we brought over the distributed amount. We're going to go ahead and we're going to add this. And again, we're going to see here how we have the information. Item cost is not updated because we're doing this would be updated from the purchasing standpoint. So let's look at that. Let's go to purchases in AP. Let's create a purchase order. Take these three items. Let's leave it this way here. Let's open up our form. And you can see we have the zero amount. Let's turn that off because we haven't entered anything yet. Let's go here and put 1,000, 500. And we can see our distribution amount. Let's add the purchase order. Again, we can see our amounts. And let's copy this directly to an AP invoice. Again, if we open up our form, let's look at the distribution freight amounts. Again, we can see here. Let's go ahead and add the AP invoice. AP invoice we just created. You can see now that our item cost has changed. Our item cost went from $332, it actually went down to $331.4 because we're using a moving average. You can also see that our last purchase price has also been updated. So when you create an AP invoice, it updates the last purchase price as well as the item cost. So again, to recap, let's look at what we've discussed. We're talking about the additional expenses in SAP Business One. We refer to that as freight. In our administration tab, we go to Setup, General, and we have our freight. Here we determine the name of the freight we want to use. We select the revenue accounts for general ledger postings, as well as the expense accounts for general ledger postings. The revenue is affected by sales documents. The expenses are affected by the purchasing documents. We can set a fixed amount for revenue. We can set a fixed amount for expenses. We can talk about our distribution rules, how we want to distribute the product. Again, we can choose none, so we won't be distributing. We can choose quantity, the distribution of the freight amount among the document rows in proportion to the quantity of each row. As we saw from our example, if we have rows with quantity of 5, 3, and 2, respectively, and the freight amount is $100, the freight amount is distributed for $50 for the first row, $30 for the second row, and $20 for the third. We can also use volume and weight. Again, the volume and weight must be set up for the items within SAP Business One, but the volume will distribute the freight amount among the document rows in proportion to the volume of each item. The weight will distribute the freight amount among the document rows in proportion to the weight of each item. You can select equally. Equally distributes the freight equally among the document rows. So for example, the freight amount is divided by the number of rows and distributed accordingly, regardless of the quantity, total, or volume and weight of each row. We can also do a row total, which we saw today. The row total distributes the freight amount among the document rows in proportion to the total amount of each row. For example, if we have 3 rows with the amount of $500, $300, and $200 respectively, and the freight amount is $100, the freight amount will be distributed as follows: $50 for the first row, $30 for the second row, and $20 for the third row. We can include 1099. We have 1099 vendors. We can look at our drawing method. Again, the drawing method specifies the required calculation method of the freight per row. The calculation method you select becomes evident when you copy the rows from the base document to the target document, which we saw going from a sales order to a delivery, as well as a purchase order to an AP invoice. If you select none, no freight will be copied to the target document. Quantity, the amount is divided into the item quantity, and each unit carries the same quantity of freight. Total, SAP One calculates which part of the document total or row total is copied to the target document, and it adds the relative amount of the document or row freight to the target document. If you select all, it copies all the freight to the target document. You have the option of stock. It adds the freight amount either at the row level or the total level to the items cost calculated when working with perpetual inventory. So we saw that. We actually changed our item cost when we did the AP invoice. The last purchase price updates the last purchase price after we add an AP invoice, which includes freight per row. Again, we saw that for the item. By the way, we talked about before, if you have the stock, if you do select stock, you cannot have this as none. You must select an amount because we are updating the item cost. Distribution rules, we have our standard SAP distribution rules as well as our projects. You can assign a distribution rule to the freight. That will be the default going through. You can also assign a project. So that's our freight setup. These are defaults that will be carried over. We have the option of changing these within the marketing documents. let's go here and look. Let's look at our sales order. Let's just change this for now, sticking with the example we used. Again, we can see when we distribute our freight amount. When we open up the freight link, again, we have everything here. So we're going to go put $100. And again, this is our distribution method. So here we have row total. So if we update that, we can see our distribution based on row total. We modify that. And we update. We can see our distribution is equally. We obviously have to round the last line. Let's do the same here. Let's do 5, 3, and 2. Again, if we do this based on quantity, this should be the same way. We could do it based on weight and volume. And so on. We have the information. Again, the drawing method determines when we actually do the information, and we can see this in our draw wizard. So if we go to our target document, in this case we're going to go to a delivery. I'm going to call up our customer. We do a copy from. Let's just choose the last sales order we just did. You can see here, draw all data. See the freight will come over automatically if we do this. We'll also set up if we draw the data and we change this. So instead of 5, we're going to bring over 4, 2, and 1. We can see the freight is going to change. Again, because we selected it in the draw method. So we're bringing over the freight proportionally to what we had. We had here, as we can see, we originally had in our sales order the amount of $100. Now we're drawing not all the totals, so we're going here. Open it up so we can see. So here we distributed the amount based on the quantity. So now we're bringing all the quantities over. We're bringing over partial quantity, so we're going to make the adjustment, bring the freight proportional based on that. So again, you can see the freight comes over. That's a proportional amount, and you can see it here. If we add that delivery, and we create a delivery for the remaining amount, again, you can see our remaining quantities here, and you can see our remaining freight. Again, there's our remaining freight. Just add that delivery. So that concludes today's webinar on SAP Business One, the additional expenses, also known as freight. And we're going to be recording this webinar. It'll be available on our website. You can visit us at www.michellgroup.com to view it. Once again, we thank you for your time.